I find it very concerning how theater and live performance is on Netflix now. It is very flattering, very humbling, very rewarding, and on a humane level, on a professional level. It's the marriage between technology and art.
Hello, and welcome to the Theatre Art Life podcast, sponsored by Harlequin Floors, the world leader in floors, stage systems, and studio equipment for the performing arts. Our podcast puts the spotlight on those who create live entertainment around the world, the culture creators, the backstage masters. My name is Anna Robb.
And my name is Anna Aguilera. Today, Omar Madkour shares with us his experiences as a lighting designer.
Born into a family of engineers in Cairo, Egypt, Omar developed a passion for movie directing. For this reason, he studied stage acting, wrote a play for his undergrad thesis, and started a career as a lighting designer. His designs have been presented in various countries, festivals and venues such as the Wallis Annenberg in Los Angeles, Maxim Gorki Theatre in Berlin, BoZar in Brussels, Shubbak Festival in London, D-CAF in Cairo, UNAM, Mexico City, among others. Credits vary from classical theatre to new works and experimental performance. Selected credits include the West Coast premiere of Young John Lee's We're Gonna Die, the workshop production of Black Like Me, Waiting for Godot, Measure for Measure, and La Princesa, a co-devised piece which won first prize in ArtChangeUS competition. His background in performing and directing and writing has shaped his design process, allowing it to stem from a dramaturgical approach rather than a solely aesthetic one. Omar, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna and Anna, for having me on the show.
It's easy to remember our names. They're just the same. So,
Exactly.
So you're currently in Los Angeles. And
yeah, that is correct.
And do you freelance? Is that how you work? I mean, what's your sort of day-to-day work at the moment?
I go with the flow. So I had a full-time job recently, and at the time being, I am freelancing. I'm about to start a teaching job on a college, which it's just one class a semester, so that should also allow me to continue freelancing on the side. So yeah, I've had full-time work, I've had freelance phases, I've had part-time phases. I kind of like go with the flow.
So you started with like movie directing and you started stage acting and all of that. So what was the trajectory to lighting design? Tell us how that worked.
Funny enough, ever since I was a kid, I kind of knew that I wanted to be in the arts, and I went through stages where, as a kid, I thought I wanted to be a singer, but my mom was very honest with me about how she felt about how I sounded when I sang in the house. And then there were times when I thought I wanted to be an actor, and that stage kind of like lasted for a while. And times when I wanted to write, times when I wanted to direct. So I always knew that I wanted to be in the arts, but never did I think that lighting would be my career and my profession. And I went into lighting in undergrad, and the whole time I probably thought that this was going to be like a hobby or something that I like to do on the side. And then after I finished undergrad, I was trying to work as an actor in Egypt, but all the time people would call me and say, hey, like, we're directing a play and we're looking for a lighting designer, and we remember you were good at this in undergrad. Would you be interested in lighting our play? And it's a paid job. And I'm like, yeah, sure. That hobby is gonna be a paid thing on the side, and eventually became my life and became my career. And honestly, I really, really enjoy it. I'm very, very glad that it did become my career.
That's kind of fascinating. I wonder sometimes, like all the kids that we wanted to work in the arts, if we only had a little bit more information, then, like not the stage careers, there's way more. Because Anna went through the same, so did I.
Yeah, I didn't even know that backstage work existed till I pretty much went to university. And I always went on stage, but I never liked it. I don't know why I continued doing it. So what was your impetus to leave Egypt? Like, how did you get international work? How did you end up in Los Angeles? How did that trajectory happen?
Yeah, so I started touring locally, then internationally as a lighting designer. touring, with theater shows as a lighting designer and an assistant lighting designer, and eventually so I thought, I was really good at lighting, and then I started touring internationally, and I realized that there's so much about lighting that I don't know. I realized that there's so much from the technical standpoint as well as the artistic practice that I didn't. I didn't know about, and I decided, well, maybe it's not a bad idea to pursue my master's in lighting. I've been wanting to do my master's in theater, but I didn't really know what specialization would I go into, because like I said, I kept going from acting to directing to writing to like all of those different interests in theater, and at one point I was like, well, what about this thing that I'm actually making a living off of? How about I do my master's in it? And I applied to something called the URTAS, which is a conference essentially where you submit your application, and multiple grad schools who participate at the URTAS, they get to see your portfolio. So you travel to Chicago and you do kind of like a speed dating sort of grad school interviews. So you have a desk, you set up your portfolio, people, or like by people I mean professors from all the participating schools in that year. They go around and they sign up on your desk to interview you, and we do like quick 20-minute interviews throughout the day. And you continue the conversation online, and you find the good fit for you. And I was one of the very lucky people. I got interviews by 20-something universities that day, and eventually I went with CalArts. They were definitely on my top schools in that year, and I was very happy that I was also a candidate of interest for them.
That's really cool.
And that's how I ended up. And that's how I ended up in Los Angeles. So, yeah.
And you're still there.
Yeah, exactly. And I am still here. I thought I was going to be in New York after I graduate CalArts, but then a pandemic happened. So
yeah. No, that's great. And so when you go into a lighting design, like what's your process? Tell us where do you start when you're working on a project when it comes to the creative process?
Yeah, it depends on the project, I would say. I really, given that I come from a background of performance or writing, I really do like to work from a dramatic or a dramaturgical starting point. I try to find a common ground in the conversation between my visual process, my design process, and the director and the playwright and the actors, what conversations they are having, and how can my design enhance that product that they are trying to produce. So funny enough, when I was in Egypt, I used to refer to myself as a techie. I used to be like, oh, I'm a techie, like I'm this cool guy who sits in the dark and presses buttons and on fancy machines and whatnot. But part of grad school for me was enhancing my artistic skills and enhancing my artistic voice and becoming an artistic collaborator with the other designers, with the director, and not be so much of a techie. So I always try for this to be my processes, to be completely collaborative, not be afraid to go for something simple because the actors are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, or the script is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. It's like a very vulnerable moment, and we don't want a bunch of flash and trash and colors and effects and all of that. And then there are other times when you do need this flashy, fancy looking design. But yeah, being able to fine tune my artistic voice is I think the one thing that I try to continue to have as the soul of my work, if that makes sense.
Totally.
And you talk, I think it was on your website that you mentioned about abstract storytelling, and I think light is probably one of the best ways to do so. But I wonder, what exactly do you mean by that, and what does it mean? Yeah, what does it mean to you?
It's so like I find that lighting is just a visual way of painting, right? It's not gonna tell the story in the sense that it's gonna give you a narrative of beginning, middle, and end the same way that words can give you that. I mean, yes, of course, it can give you some sort of structure throughout the performance, but not in the same way that words can, and I don't think it should aim to provide meaning in the same way that that literal formats can, and therefore I feel like thinking of my lighting design as kind of like an abstract painting that supports and holds the storytelling is probably the best I can provide to a performance. Also, I am interested in performance that raises questions as opposed to give answers. I'm not interested in theater that tells us how to live our life and where the protagonist wins and the antagonist dies, and and I think stories that tend to raise questions, that tend to make the audience uncomfortable, that tend to push the audience to think and to leave the theater wondering about something, or going home and being like, you know what, I want to Google that thing. That kind of performance is the kind of performance that I really like to be a part of. So yeah, it's not interested in telling stories that tie the knot essentially, and give us peace of mind.
I like that. I think, I often sort of ask myself whether our theatrical arts are a reflection of culture or whether they drive culture, right? And I think the only way, if you're driving culture, it's doing what you're doing. It's to provoke and to agitate the audience to think or to work, although there's not always the platform for people to want to come to see that kind of work, right? So it's always, we usually get into this industry because we want to move people, and just reflecting society back to them, like you said, tying the knots and a nice easy story isn't necessarily doing that. You've got to really push the boundaries, and that's the challenge in theatre arts, is you've got to push the boundaries but get people to come. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because we are already competing. So in live performance, I feel like we are already competing with streaming platforms where you get the comfort of choosing between hundreds and hundreds of comfort drama that you can watch at the comfort of your living room couch and eating your comfort food and all of that, and then and then you're competing with that, trying to tell people, no, like leave your house, get into a car, or pay money to come watch a show that's going to make you uncomfortable. So
yeah. Do you think that's just going to be getting harder and harder, because I think that kind of entertainment is becoming easier and easier on demand, right? So how do we continue to get people to theatre and bums in seats, essentially?
That's a great question, and I wish I had the answer to it. I don't know how we can compete with that accessible entertainment industry that is TV and platforms, but I will tell you that it makes me very nervous when I see theater or live performance right now, and by right now I mean at a time when the pandemic is kind of, it didn't finish, but kind of like, yeah, in a way, and we're allowed to have performances again, but then you kind of see directors and choreographers going in the direction of making their performances accessible on the internet. This kind of concerns me because I think about theater in Egypt and in the 19th and 70s and pretty much the second half of the of the 20th century, theater was recorded and televised, and over generations, people just stopped going to theater. People stopped leaving their house and going to the theater to watch plays. And like when I was in living in Egypt and I was doing theater, there was a time when I had a day job in like a TV company, and it was just like something to get some steady income coming in. And I remember telling a colleague of mine at the company that I'm taking some days off because I'm touring with a show internationally, and he said, "Oh, will that show happen in Egypt as well?" And I said, "Yes, it is happening in Egypt actually nowadays." And he asked me, "What TV channel is it airing on?" And I was like, "No, it's a theater piece." And he was like, "Yeah, but like which TV channel is producing it, or which TV channel is airing?" And I'm like, No. It's a performance piece where you go." And he was like, oh. And it was, like a moment of, oh, do these still even exist? So I find it very concerning how theater and live performance is on Netflix now.
Mm.
Well, but on the other hand, like I see it like I like symphonic orchestras a lot. And in the city where I grew up, there wasn't one. There is one now, but there wasn't for the first 20 years of my life. So does that mean that I don't get to listen to symphonic orchestras? Because I could, because of TV, internet, and the radio.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Is there is definitely a reason, and making it accessible is certainly valid enough reason for it to be documented and made available online. But I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm just saying that there is one part of the world where I come from where, unfortunately, like I said, like just people stopped going to theater and people stopped producing theater. It became produced only for TV, and that factor, like you start dealing with TV censorship and political censorship, and you start dealing with a producer who was an advertiser who bought some commercial time during that airing schedule, and it just becomes a completely different art form. And yeah, it's much more complicated than what I'm trying to say. And yes, you are correct that there is a reason.
No, but it's a good example, having given that, because I didn't know that. And so that is kind of a warning sign to see that too much of that could result in it not happening live. And that's an interesting thing to consider when we're thinking about, like, we love to hear those viewpoints from the people we speak with around the world, because it helps form a vision of what's going on, So how is it in California? I mean, is there a lot of experimental theatre? Do people go to it? Is that what you sort of end up working on mostly around there locally? How is the scene there?
So I graduated in May 2020, which was just a couple months into the pandemic, and of course there was no live performance at all at the time being. And eventually, I found myself going into the museum world actually, and I was working at a museum for a couple of years until very recently. Like I'm still kind of like finding my area of life in California where I'm working the most. I think so far I've done a bunch of dance shows with independent companies, and still kind of like trying to find out where I fit in the live performance scene in Los Angeles. I will say that given the fact that Los Angeles and California is kind of like really spread out, makes the community, the theater community and the dance community, kind of like somewhat scattered, as opposed to in cities like New York or in Cairo or in London or in Berlin, where it's geographically much more contained, and you run into people all the time, and you go to watch a show and then you run into 5 people who at at the show, and then after the show at a nearby restaurant or bar, or and then from there also that shapes the community that you work with, that shapes where and who you work with. So I feel like I haven't established this yet in Los Angeles, even though I've been here for long enough. But yeah, I guess it's part of the process of
Absolutely.
finding.
As we've said a couple of times today, the industry that we work in is not linear. It doesn't go in a straight line.
Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not.
When you said you did museum work, would you do lighting stuff within the museum work, or was it something different?
Yeah, lighting. So I was working as a lighting technician, and then eventually got promoted to a lighting designer with a museum here in Los Angeles, and then eventually got another full-time work opportunity, which unfortunately didn't happen, even though I had left the museum job for that full-time opportunity. So this is how I kind of like ended up going back into the freelance world. But yeah, museum world was also interesting because in live performance you are dealing with human beings who are moving around and all of that. In the museum world, you're dealing with artwork that is years and years old, and it's static. So it's static, but it also has character and it has history in it, and you have to consider very different things. You have to consider, like, how old is this piece of art? How much light can I expose it to? Because too much light can make the artwork degrade, and yeah, like you start dealing with things and what the material is, like, is it made of paper, paint, something else? So completely different experience, I have to say.
Yeah,
sounds really exciting.
Yeah,
that sounds like something up your alley, Anna. There's such a like you said, just there's such a nature in which the way you have to handle artworks from, theatre in comparison is very rough and tumble compared to museum work, which is like delicate work, right? Like, and so actually, out of interest, then maybe a technical question. I mean, is there a standard of like light that should be put on the artwork, and what is that level? And then is it like should only be exposed to a certain amount of light per day? Like, what's the rules roughly?
Yeah, so what I came to learn is it varies from the conservation department, kind of like varies from one museum to the other. But in most, like in some museums they are super strict. In other museums they can be slightly more lenient. I guess it also depends on the artwork. But essentially, yes, you can only use LEDs on artwork. So from a theater world where most of the time the equipment is incandescent fixtures that heat up and you're like 200 watts or something, and it's an incandescent bulb that does not that is no longer really used in the museum world.
Not acceptable anymore.
Yeah, exactly. You can't expose the artwork to heat. You can't expose the artwork to something very bright. You can't expose the artwork to UV light. For instance, you can't have. Again, it depends on the material that the artwork is made of, but ideally, you don't want to expose the artwork to sunlight, for instance, to daylight, because there's UV lights in it. Conservation teams, they typically go around and measure the light that's hitting, how many foot candles are hitting the artwork, and they would flag if something is over the foot candle requirement. Sometimes even the loan agreement would say in the contract you cannot go over a certain amount of foot candles. So regardless of the artistic, well, I don't want to say regardless of the artistic intent. Let me actually rephrase that. Let me say that it becomes just another artistic challenge. So everyone, typically everyone involved wants to present the artwork in the nicest way and the most elegant way, and part of that is always lighting. So it's just a question of making sure that this artwork stays for as long as it possibly can.
And now a moment for our sponsor. The Theatre Art Life podcast is proud to be sponsored by Harlequin. Harlequin is the world leader in floors, stage systems, and studio equipment for the performing arts. Established in the UK over 40 years ago, Harlequin is the preferred performance floor for the world's most prestigious dance and performing arts companies, theatres, and schools, from the Royal Opera House to the Bolshoi Theatre, the New York City Ballet to the Royal New Zealand Ballet. Harlequin's experience and reputation are founded on the development, manufacture, and supply of a range of high-quality sprung and vinyl floors specifically designed for dance and the performing arts. Backed by an engineering team and independent research, Harlequin also designs, builds, and refurbishes stages, working with stage engineers and theatre consultants in leading venues across the world. Harlequin is the global leader in its field with offices in Europe, the Americas, and Asia Pacific. Find out more at harlequinfloors.com, HARLEQUIN floors.com.
I want to go back a little bit to your time in Egypt and your experiences in Egypt and how did you end up touring and how is it like today? Like one, or at least personally, I hear about precisely museum world and cultural heritage and like architectural stuff or more like anthropological stuff, but it's not often that we get to hear about the performing arts. That's, I guess, one question. And the other one, I was like thinking when you were talking about your work with light, that you come, we're assuming, as being Arabic your native language, is it?
Yeah, that is correct.
It's a language where literature and storytelling are so important. And how do you translate, like the actual story is very important. The what you were saying about being able to tell the story with words. And then you branch out completely and go into light to tell stories that are not concrete, that are completely abstract. And how does that play in your head, like coming from this very poetic narrative to this more poetic but more abstract storytelling? I guess two different questions. Whatever you want to answer is fine.
Yeah, so the one about the language and going from something completely literal to something completely abstract. I think it's so far, as long as I've been in communication with the director or with the playwright about what it is what story are we trying to tell, I think I've found it easy to kind of like translate this into something visual, into something that can, like I said, be a visual container for the story. So, for instance, I remember there was a play that I worked on at Cal Arts. It was called Black Like Me, and Black Like Me was a real story of a white journalist in the 60s who started traveling around the south of the United States. He dyed his skin black and started touring, traveling around the south of the United States, pretending to be a black man, and he wrote articles about that quote-unquote experiment, what he refers to as an experiment, and claiming to understand what it's like to be a black man in the United States back then. And then those articles were put together into a diary or a book that was published, and it was actually made into a movie. And then an artist friend of mine, a director and a playwright, his name is Monty Cole, he decided to kind of like make this book into a play, and he, as a black artist, cast a black ensemble, and a big part of the production was how can they take ownership over telling this story, like this story that is a story of the black community in the south of the United States being told by a white man back then. How can it be retold from the point of view of the Black ensemble of actors and writers and performers, and that agency, that question of agency, translated very quickly through conversations with the director to what about if we have lighting fixtures that you can take out, they're kind of like mounted, they're part of the scene, and the actors can take them out and they can literally shine the light on a scene, like they can kind of like design the scene. And we worked during the rehearsals on what that meant for very specific moments, and and from like from there, it's like that design idea kind of like became like I said, a visual container for that storytelling idea, that agency of the Black ensemble telling their own stories as opposed to the white man telling their story. So there are examples like this, that as long as there is a clear way of communicating and brainstorming with the design team, the ideas and these quote unquote abstract design narratives come very genuinely and very smoothly, very quickly. It doesn't become an added part or a performance of its own. No, it's something that is integrated. And then there are other times when communication is not as great and as fruitful, and I kind of like do my best then to stay true to the story that we're trying to tell with my design and with my abstractions. Sorry, what was the second question?
The other question was about you touring in Egypt and the performing arts in Egypt, that it's not something I personally hear about very often.
I'd say the theater scene in Egypt and the performance scene in Egypt has kind of become divided into a very commercial kind of performance scene, which probably has to do with the fact that, like I said, there isn't heavy traffic of audience going to the theaters and to the venues. So you have the commercial theater, which is funded by TV in a way, and then you have the very independent underground theater scene, which is a bunch of poor artists putting on political productions, and the same audience keeps going on to those performances, which is unfortunate that it's such a small, like really the best way for that underground scene to survive is to have their work presented in festivals, especially international festivals, and tour abroad. And this is actually this is how I made a living for a couple of years in Egypt. Is I used to tour with shows to Europe, get paid in euros, come back to Egypt, transform those euros into Egyptian pounds. And working for 10 days in Europe, I'd come back and I have enough money for about a couple months because of the currency rate. So these are the two performance scenes that currently strongly exist in Egypt. Needless to say, I belong to the poor artists who try to work abroad to make a living. That's not to say that there is some good art sometimes and good artists in the commercial side, but again, it's TV funded. It's subject to censorship and other political aspects of the process.
That's totally what I used to do in Australia. I used to do a few corporate gigs to pay the bills and then go do the artistic projects as well that fed my soul, I actually have one more question before we ask our last couple of questions, but it's really interesting to me that you worked on a project like Black Like Me, and you're talking about art as a political tool. But the three of us on this podcast none of us are American, right? So how does it feel coming from, you've come from your culture and now you're mounting quite probably what is a bit of a political statement, that one, Black Like Me. How is it, does that, is it you getting on board about that? Are you wanting to push your own sort of vision for stuff? And actually, did Black Like Me, was that received well? How did it go?
Yeah, I think it was received well, and also I know that Monty, the director and the playwright, he had another kind of like version of it done on Zoom during the pandemic, which unfortunately I couldn't attend, and I believe he's still working on it. So the production was very well received, but. Yeah, you're asking a very, very important question, is being in the US, which is a country that has immigrants from very different backgrounds and very different experiences, and trying to get together as artists and put together work that is relative to some of us, but very foreign to other collaborators. I think that's a very interesting question. It's a very good lesson in learning when to speak and when to listen and learn, and very good exercise in understanding history from the point of view of people who are more directly related to a certain story, as opposed to learning about it from the internet or from books or from documentaries. Kind of like listening to different artists who come to the table and say, okay, I have the story that I want to tell, and I'm inviting you to collaborate with me. It is very flattering, very humbling, very rewarding, very, very, very rewarding on a humane level, on a professional level. And yeah, I think it's always kind of like an honor, like, I know this might sound a little dramatic, but it is kind of like an honor to be a part of delivering a certain part of history, or a certain or shedding the light on a certain atrocity that took place in a certain time, a certain location, wwhere I personally am not related to in a direct way. But yeah, exactly. But
no, but I think because it's kind of like a weird dichotomy. But I understand, especially with this play, it's like they're saying it's my story to tell, right? So, and that's a fair thing to say as a Black person in America, but at the same time, from a creative lens, to have somebody like you in the process to go, not that you can identify with the story, but maybe from an outsider's point of view, I don't understand what you're saying here, or what are we really trying to say? And from a creative perspective, making sure that message is perhaps communicated to people who are not from that world, right? So it's just a weird thing to play with, but it's good, like, that you were involved with that. And I think that's more internet or more perspectives on local political issues from wherever that comes from can only bring perspective sometimes, I think, right, to an issue. And that's really the only way you're going to change it, if other people, if everybody's involved in that discussion,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what's your favorite thing about your job as a lighting designer?
I think it's the marriage between technology and art, honestly. As someone who is kind of like a tech geek, and someone who's fascinated with technology, and then kind of like getting to utilize this heavy equipment and a very advanced and sophisticated technology to make something very intangible, extremely intangible, yet extremely effective, and can touch the soul in a very beautiful way. I think that's the I think that's the beauty of being a lighting designer. I want to say, among other things, but that's the thing that I consider the most beautiful.
I like it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm very curious about your work as well. I'd love to see it.
Thank you, Anna. I'll invite you. I'll make sure to extend invitations for the next production.
Maybe one online, or maybe whenever I'm back in LA. What's the one thing you'd change about either the industry or your job?
About the industry, maybe the fact that I don't know how I would change it, but maybe the fact that it is financially very challenging at many times to kind of like sustain yourself working in theater 100%. I think if I can change that, I would 100% do it without hesitation. How or what the change would entail, I have no idea, to be honest. But that's definitely something that I would love to change about the industry, about lighting in specific. I would say involving lighting designers at the very last minute is sometimes challenging, because you're there after the set construction ideas have been finalized, and maybe even construction started, or maybe even kind of like close to being finished, and you're like, well, we could have integrated lighting in the scenic. We could have done all of those cool ideas, or at least some cool ideas in the process, and had fruitful conversations. But unfortunately, sometimes lighting designers get hired just days before tech.
Yeah, it's a good point, especially on the lower budget ones where they can't afford to bring in people earlier, and you miss out on those opportunities, right?
It's either that, or then we have to make something fit in the scenery that, like, oh, we need to make this picture fit in this scenery that wasn't designed to have this fitting inside, or things like that.
Totally like that. So how do people find you? You got website, a contact, to follow you on Instagram? How, if people want to know more, where do they find that?
Yeah, I have a website and I have an Instagram account. My website is omarmadkour.com, omarmadkour.com, and my Instagram is Omar B Madkour, so it's at OMARBMADKOUR.
Awesome. We'll put that on the description of the podcast so people can find you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omar, for hanging out with us today. It's been really a pleasure to hear about your work and life in California, and I wish you the best for picking up those projects over there.
Thank you, Anna, and I appreciate you inviting me.
Theater Art Life is a global media site for entertainment. Memberships start at only $38 per year. You can have unlimited access to our daily published articles, including entertainment news and the writings of active industry professionals, ensuring that you are always up to date on the global happenings in the world of entertainment. Become a part of the international entertainment community and join us now at www.theaterartlife.com.